Buenos días y bienvenidos a todos. ¿Estamos listos para comenzar? Mi nombre es María Pérez y estoy con la organización Democracy Rising. Mi pronombre es ella y estoy aquí con ustedes hoy desde Santa Fe, Nuevo México. Les quiero agradecer por haberse tomado el tiempo de estar aquí con nosotros el día de hoy. Y ahora, para los que hablan inglés, Heather va a hacer esta misma introducción en inglés.
All right. Well, everyone, hi and welcome. Thank you for that great introduction. For all the non-Spanish speakers on the call, I'm going to cover what Maria said in English. Maria from Democracy Rising introduced herself. She uses she, her pronouns and is joining us from Santa Fe, New Mexico. She wanted to thank you for taking the time to being with us today. My name is Heather Villanueva. I use she, her pronouns, Deputy Director of More Equitable Democracy. More Equitable Democracy works to advance racial justice through transforming electoral systems. We started this session in Spanish because we wanted to demonstrate what it's like for folks every day who may not speak the dominant language in the US, English, and how disorienting everyday situations can be. We did not offer interpretation for that first section, but rest assured from here on out, we will be. We're using a platform called Voiceboxer that, with the help of our professional interpreters, allows our presenters to speak in multiple languages. Our target language for today is English. That means if you speak English, you will want to change the channel on your bottom right to English. If you happen to speak and understand Cantonese, Spanish, Korean, and English, shout out to you polyglots, or if you just want to hear only what people are saying in the original language with no interpretation, you can choose floor, as in that person has the floor. If you choose any other language on the bottom right than English or floor, you will not hear anything, as we do not have audiences who exclusively speak those languages, so we're not offering interpretation. You can also participate in the chat in multiple languages. If you hover over a comment, you'll see that it will be translated into your selected language. Note that this is a machine translation, so it will not be perfect. And if you have any questions at any time, drop them and ask a question, and we'll try to get them at the end of the presentation. Also, I don't have an image for this, but we do have closed captioning, which you should be able to see. We agreed to be the guinea pigs for this new feature for Voiceboxer, and you could turn it on and off at the bottom of your screen. It's also a machine translation based on the English channel. If you find you're having any technical difficulties at all, we have live technical support from Voiceboxer. Just press a question mark at the bottom left. Are folks ready to get started? I'll go ahead and pass it back to Maria.
Thank you, Heather. I wanted to ask everybody how your experience was when we started this meeting in Spanish without having access to the English language channel yet. For those of you who may speak Spanish, how was that? And for those of you who don't, how was that? If you're wanting to share your experience, please feel free to put it in the chat. With that, I now want to introduce to you our co-hosts today. We have Alan Oliver with the Thornburg Foundation in New Mexico and Jeremy McKee with the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York City. And we'll start with Alan.
Good morning, everybody. Buenos dias a todos. My name is Alan Oliver. I'm Executive Director of the Thornburg Foundation. Good morning from New Mexico, which Maria has already kind of highlighted a little bit for us, but New Mexico is the sixth most diverse state in the nation and home to 23 sovereign nations, including both tribes and pueblos. It's 39% of our population speak a language other than English at home, mostly Spanish, and about 12% speak a language other than English or Spanish, such as indigenous languages of Diné, Tewa, Tiwa, Perez, and Apache. So given our state's rich cultural diversity, our foundation has repeatedly made grants supporting translation of materials, such as voting guides or educational resources, which we've had an experience of sometimes working and sometimes not working so well. And so when the team at Democracy Rising came to us with the idea that voting it's a values decision, and it's simply translating English materials into another language, might not provide a cultural lens that'll resonate with those folks who are reading or receiving those materials. And so in the case of ranked choice voting, the belief is that translated materials might be factually accurate, but they wouldn't motivate people to want to cast a ranked ballot, or understanding why doing so might benefit their community. And so Maria Perez suggested that we support Spanish focus groups that would help answer those questions by generating messages and educational strategies in language. I also wanted to just share a really modest experience of working in Florida on a political campaign, and remembering working on, we would be working with Spanish language communities, but then receiving materials that were translated from English into Spanish, but that were generated actually in New Mexico, and bringing those materials, and it didn't resonate with the community. And so, so Maria, thank you for lifting this insight, and we're really, that simple translation might not always be enough. And so we're excited to join with all of you to learn more about the results of this exciting research. And now I believe I'll hand the microphone back to you all. And thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Maria. And especially thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day for this incredible presentation, which I just had the privilege to see once, but I'm super excited to see it again. Quickly, my name is Jeremy McKee, pronouns he, him. I represent the Rockefeller Brothers Fund as Special Assistant and Project Manager for the President and CEO. The RBF is a national foundation based in New York that focuses on the thematic areas of sustainable development, peace building, and democracy. The project that I work on in the President's office seeks to implement the recommendations of a report published in 2020 by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. That report, Our Common Purpose, proposes 31 recommendations across institutions, civil society, and political culture to reimagine American democracy. One of those recommendations is ranked choice voting. It is a premise of the report and of my own work at the RBF that ranked choice voting and other structural reforms that seek to create proportional representation have the potential to shift our democratic system in a direction that is more resilient, effective, and inclusive, and to help build a truly pluralistic, multiracial democracy. But that potential is only that, a potential. How these reforms are brought to communities and how they are implemented in partnership with communities or not makes all the difference between a clever idea that aspires toward greater democratic inclusion and an actual structural change that deepens the experience of democracy for all. So that's the lesson I've learned from Democracy Rising and from Maria and Grace, that structural reforms that aspire toward equity and inclusion have to be implemented in ways that are themselves equitable and inclusive, and language justice is at the very center of that idea. So once again, deep gratitude to Democracy Rising, to more equitable democracy, and to all of you for joining this briefing. I'll turn it back over to Heather.
Thank you, Alan and Jeremy. Now let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're all going to get on the same page about what we actually mean when we say language justice. I'm really passionate about language justice, and one of the reasons is that I grew up speaking only English, even though my parents each speak 4 languages, 3 Filipino languages and English. These are my parents. It's not their fault they didn't pass other languages down to me. It's what they were told to do as new immigrants in the 70s and 80s. That's them on the bottom right before they left for the US. I fell into language justice work as an organizer of union members and an organizer of immigrant rights. I came to see people, not that different from my parents, were being ignored and treated as insignificant and stupid because they spoke English with a non-European accent, even in social justice and progressive political spheres. Oftentimes, I'd see efforts to increase language access. It would be the bare minimum when I did, sometimes as little as Google Translate. To get language justice right, there are 3 pillars that are central to understanding and internalizing. One is having a core belief that there are people of all languages who can be smart, capable humans, and that diversity of ideas and perspectives will help us solve problems and make our lives richer and better. This seems like a no-brainer, but it actually means we have to confront our own implicit biases. I went on sabbatical to learn my parents' language. It's called Pangasinan. And when I came back, I could understand what they said under their breaths when they fought across the dinner table. For the first time, I saw a whole new dimension to these people. And honestly, it did make my life richer to know what they were saying, even if it was messy. Native languages are languages that you use to express what's in your heart and in your gut. Many people, including myself, have made the mistake of assuming that just because a person can't express themselves well in English means they can't and don't have complex thoughts, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. And of course, people have complex thoughts and feelings about things like their work situation, their system of taxation, and their ability or not to participate in US democracy. The second pillar is that language justice is about recognizing that there is inherent power and privilege for the speakers of the dominant language. In the US, that's English. As an English speaker, you never worry that you can find information in your language about how to pay your taxes, apply for healthcare insurance, read the train schedule, read your ballot, find information about candidates. For English speakers, these things are not a problem, but for non-English speakers, they are constant barriers that get in the way of people being able to live in their full lives. And that's why we have to work towards our third pillar, intentionally working to create a level playing field for non-dominant language speakers. Again, I'm not talking about using Google Translate or expecting limited English-speaking parents to bring their child with them to gynecology appointments to interpret, which definitely happens and it's definitely awkward. I'm talking about investing in professional written translation and verbal interpretation done by professionals, paying them professional and fair wages for the critical services they're providing. I'm also talking about designing your campaigns and programs from the beginning to include audiences who primarily speak languages other than English and incorporating processes to fully integrate and encourage their participation. So that's what we mean by language justice. I'm really proud to have helped lead and resource the project in New York City, especially because I got to work closely with the amazing speakers that you're going to hear from today. So let me tell you a little bit more about this project. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, over a fifth of the US population does not speak English at home. This is double what it was in 1980. Last year, 36 cities across the country used ranked choice voting, including New York City, Las Cruces, and Salt Lake City. Millions of voters across the country who do not speak English at home voted or could have voted in these elections. In New York City alone, 49% of the population does not speak English at home, and that's why it's so important to engage non-English speaking communities. Ahead of the 2021 primary election in New York City, community-based organizations Mingguan and the New York Center for New York Immigration Coalition and national organizations More Equitable Democracy, my organization, and Democracy Rising implemented an in-language research project in New York. Our goal was to identify attitudes about democracy and representation and to determine ideal messaging for voters in Cantonese, Mandarin, Korean, Bangla, Arabic, and English, and for those folks who belong to those communities. Mingguan and NYIC and their partner organizations were able to immediately incorporate the findings from this research and messaging practices, which were informed by the race class narrative research in their voter outreach. You can see the reports we produce here. My colleague will drop links in the chat for you to download. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Maria to tell you more details about our projects.
Thank you, Heather. And hi again, everyone. I am Maria Perez, co-director of Democracy Rising. We seek to create an environment where all communities have access to political power and can fully participate in the democratic process. Following up on the work that Heather just went over in New York City, Democracy Rising implemented a similar project with Spanish-speaking communities in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Salt Lake City, Utah, where RCV was also going to be used. I want to share a little bit about the methodology for these research projects, starting with our work model. All the relational work, including participant and facilitator recruitment, coordination, and much more, was led by our on-the-ground partners. More Equitable Democracy and Democracy Rising provided some issue area expertise, some staff time, technical assistance when it was needed, and some funding. More Equitable Democracy and Democracy Rising led the development of the study design, and that included goals, questions to be asked, materials, facilitator guides, facilitator trainings, as well as the analysis process. We did this with support from ASO Communications and We Make the Future. Local partners were participated in all aspects of the study design process. In total, 12 focus groups with monolingual or bilingual speakers were held between March and September of 2021. In this chart, you can sort of see the breakdown of which groups, which language, how many participants. Each group lasted 2 hours and on average had about 6 participants. All conversations were recorded and transcribed for the qualitative analysis, which was done using participatory analysis tools that included all partners. We hope that this research can help inform stakeholders in how to reach and engage those of us who don't speak English at home. You will get a more nuanced presentations of our findings and recommendations in the reports that you can get after this briefing. But for today, we were going to share with you some of these findings. Of course, it is impossible to generalize findings when we're talking about completely different language communities. What we are sharing today are findings that came up fairly consistently across several of the groups. So some key findings. There is an alarming lack of in-language information for non-English speakers about everything, about elections, about services, about public meetings. It is a constant barrier to participation. The opportunity to have in-depth, in-language conversations about these issues felt really important and was a rare experience for most of the participants. There is an incredible diversity of thinking and analysis of issues of democracy in non-English language communities. And this analysis is fundamentally different from an Anglo-American perspective. All of our focus groups felt that voting is an important civic duty, but that also equally important is being informed about what issue, what candidate people are asked to vote for. Reading materials are not sufficient. Having materials that include more visual or audio formats is an important part of making sure that we're reaching audiences across different age groups, socioeconomic status, language proficiency, literacy levels, etc. Having a candidate that aligns with the community values is much more important to people than having candidates that look like the community does. There is an overall understanding that the only way for some of these communities to build political power is to form voting coalitions with other ethnic and language communities. And more than 2/3 of all participants felt confident about using a ranked ballot after listening to or watching a short explanation about ranked choice voting. In the Spanish language groups, all of the participants said that they felt confident after watching a short video, and I will touch on this a little bit later. These are some of our key findings. I will pass it on to Sandra now, who will give us a deeper understanding of what we've learned.
Okay, 안녕하세요. 저는 민권. Hello, my name is Sandra Choi, and I lead Mingwon Center's Civic Participation Outreach Program. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share our experience mobilizing, serving, and educating all the communities that we represent and serve. Maria, Heather, and our presenters emphasize the importance of why language justice needs to be centered in our work. I'll begin by presenting quotes from some of our focus groups about how our voters face systemic barriers to participating in the political process. Here is our first quote. The last November election was the first time I voted in an election. I waited 30 years. People tell me voting is important, but I don't feel like it has a personal impact on my life. When I did vote, I realized I didn't know any of the candidates, even the names I've heard here and there. I didn't know anything about their platform or what they've done. This made me realize how important voting is, but knowing the candidates and making an informed decision is just as important. Okay, here is our next quote. In the Atlanta tragedy, the shooter was able to receive a license to buy a gun the same day, but to participate in elections, voters have to register at least 1 month in advance. Why is it that we are able to buy guns with ease, but make it so difficult to vote? After highlighting these two quotes, here are some other lessons we learned from focus group participants about the key barriers to civic participation. There is not enough in-language information about candidates, issues, and the voting process, leading to communities feeling like their voices are not being heard. Focus group participants reported that language itself was a big barrier, but they also felt intentionally discriminated against because of race or ethnicity. Focus group participants also felt that the wealthy and a small handful of people who are already in power are valued more, and their voices are more influential in elections. The work that we do to prepare and empower limited English proficient communities is more important now than ever, especially because beginning in 2023, close to 1 million immigrants will be able to vote in local elections. Their first vote will be a ranked choice voting election. There's so much work to look forward to and so much work to be done. Thank you. So let me now introduce you to Winnie Chin from the New York Immigration Coalition.
Hi. To self-introduce, my name is Winnie Chin, and I'm with the New York Immigration Coalition. Today, I would like to briefly share why it is so important to reform the way we provide language justice. To start, I would like to read a quote from our Cantonese and language focus group participant. It reads, "The U.S. voting system is fair, but it has loopholes that allow some to have a louder voice than others. The voices of poorer communities go unheard. This system is well-intentioned, but in application, it doesn't always fairly help everyone." I, in particular, like this quote because it not only highlights the flaws of the U.S. voting system as it stands, but it also can be applied to how we use language justice. Right now, language justice access laws should really support communities who need it most, but often, despite its well-intentions, it doesn't always fairly help the communities that need it most. For example, in New York State, just in the borough of Queens, there are over 100 spoken language, but yet our State Board of Elections only provides language support in 5 non-English languages. The services do not meet the demands of the community that need it most. What about the other hundreds of languages that are not being translated? Furthermore, New York City and upstate New York in general has different immigrant communities. And yet when we apply a statewide application of language justice, we overlook the regional needs and regional specificity. As you may see on the slides, you can see that in upstate New York, Immigrant communities there may need Arabic translations and Arabic language support more so than they would need Korean language support. But yet, under the Board of Elections, they only provide language support in Chinese, Korean, Bangla, Spanish, and English, and any other regional needs are ignored. We need localized language support that reflects the true needs of each community, not restrictive and inflexible language policies. Furthermore, our current language support primarily extends to just written translations, but many communities need more than just translated materials. In our focus groups, many participants mention that they find in-language video content more usable at times. If we really want to communicate with our communities, it is incumbent upon organizations and agencies and governments to start creating video content that is in language and not just providing translated subtitles. Here in New York City, we had just passed a bill to allow for non-citizens to participate in our municipal elections. Now more than ever, government agencies and organizations need to invest more efforts and resources to create language-accessible materials to engage this new electorate, as it will be their first time voting and making decisions in their local government. So I'm really excited to see language justice take a new form. I will now pass it off to Maria, who will talk about the findings in the Spanish language groups.
Bueno, voy a compartir.
Okay, I'm going to share a bit of information about what we learned in the Spanish focus groups. In these focus groups, there were only a couple of participants that had heard about ranked choice voting, and only one person that knew how the system worked. The only information that we shared with the participants about ranked choice voting was a brief video in Spanish that was produced by our organization. After watching the video, we asked all of the participants to share their reactions. What did they think about that way of voting? Did they think it was easy? Did they think it was confusing? Did it make sense? The reaction of the majority of the participants was something similar to, yes, that's how I make decisions in my family, or yes, that's how we make decisions at my church. You can see the quotes here on the screen. Many of the participants used analogies that were very creative when they were asked how they would explain the system to a relative or a friend. Analogies such as looking for an apartment or other analogies as you can see on this slide. In terms of finding an apartment, they would say things like, you have a list of the available apartments. Some of them will be in a good location and will have good parking, but it will be more expensive and only has 2 bedrooms. Another apartment will be further away, but it's close to the bus and has 3 bedrooms and is cheaper. And maybe another apartment is closer to your children's school, and you can have a dog, but you have to pay a deposit, and the carpet is old and dirty, and so on. You compare and you decide which one is your favorite and also which ones are your following options. If you're able to obtain your favorite one, fantastic. But if you get your second or even your third option, you'll still be happy. For the Spanish speakers in these communities, the concept of ranked choice voting is part of the culture and of how decisions are made on a daily basis. This is very important because frequently we hear resistance towards adopting ranked choice voting based on the idea that this system is very complicated and difficult to understand for those that are Spanish speakers, especially for those that are older. We need to do more research on this topic. We especially have to invest in development of messages for this community, but without a doubt, this detail is very important. With this, I'm now passing the microphone over to Dulce Gutierrez, who is going to give us a concrete example about these topics of language justice in her home. Hi, my name is Dulce Gutierrez, and I helped to create the guide that was used in the community discussions about democracy and representation. I also helped to analyze the commentaries provided by the Spanish-speaking communities during these discussions. I live in the central region of Washington in Yakima. I was the first Latina representative in my district that was elected to the municipal council in 2016, and I finished my service in 2020. Latinos constitute more than half of the city of Yakima and the county of Yakima, which makes the access to the language a vital thing for having just elections and an inclusive democracy. Although Latinos constitute the majority, the democratic representation in Yakima has a long history of excluding politics and discriminatory electoral systems. Almost 20 years ago, the problems with access to language and linguistic justice in Yakima turned into an important point of contention. The election department of Yakima County refused to respond to the need for electoral material and voting material be provided in the language appropriate for the majority of the Latino population. The lack of willingness to provide the information in Spanish directly suppressed the capacity of Latinos to participate actively in the democratic process. The lack of electoral information in Spanish was so serious that in 2004, the federal U.S. government presented a lawsuit about voting rights against the Yakima County due to not providing information related to elections in the Spanish language. The case or lawsuit alleged that the county had violated the right to vote law by not providing materials, information, or help related to Spanish language elections. The county of Yakima had to accept an agreement that required that the county establish an effective electoral program in Spanish. The requirement for the county government to provide material related to elections and voting in Spanish immediately led to an increase in efforts of outreach to Latinos on behalf of the electoral department of the county. It also increased participation of Latino voters during elections, and it increased advocacy for community investment in Latino communities. This was the first important change that led to a new awakening of conscience and advocating for the community, an irreversible change for the Latino community in Yakima. For the first time, all voters started to receive information in 2 languages regarding the democratic process and representation in local government. This helped to increase understanding and conscience that finally helped our community to make the local government accountable for their discriminatory electoral systems. In 2012, a lawsuit was presented against the city of Yakima on behalf of Latino residents that live on the east part of the city. The lawsuit accused the electoral system of the city of Yakima of weakening the Latino vote and preventing that Latinos participated in a significant manner in local elections. The city of Yakima lost the lawsuit and received an order to reform their system and implementation of district-level elections. These changes, ordered under this lawsuit, were joined with the implementation of access to the language based on the first lawsuit, helping to increase investment in outreach efforts to Latinos in Spanish on behalf of community groups and political organizations. The organizations acknowledge the importance of offering workshops for the training of the candidates and material related to the campaign as well in Spanish. And finally, we saw a great increase in the number of Latinos that won elections for public charge. And shortly afterwards, the community saw an increase in the Latino community associations with local government to offer social services. Finally, in 2020, Latino voters presented another lawsuit against the government of the county for violating the voting rights law of the state of Washington. The county agreed to replace the electoral system in the county with a district system for elections. In summary, all of this is to say that linguistic justice is the catalyst for the participation of the community and electoral participation and civic education that is intentional. Now that the Yakima County has elections that allow Latinos, that are the majority, to finally choose our preferred candidates, the importance of implementing the findings and recommendations that are key of our informs on access to language cannot be stressed enough. I hope there's an investment on behalf of all sectors for outreach towards Latino voters in a way that materials are correctly translated, and even more than that, that the message be developed in the language, and that conversations in the community are in accessible language to effectively inform people about upcoming elections and the changes in the ways in which we'll be voting for our representatives, about our candidates, and about the topics that will affect the community. Thank you. And now I'm handing over the microphone to George.
早晨，恭喜發財。
Good morning. Happy New Year. My name is Zhang Guoklang, and my English name is George Chung. I am so happy right now to see all of my good friends here.
As we finish today's program, I'm here to make two asks. First, connect with us. More Equitable Democracy and Democracy Rising have ambitious plans to expand our language justice work. For more equitable democracy, we will continue to go deep in electoral systems change, particularly proportional ranked choice voting. Whereas Democracy Rising is planning on expanding their work on implementation of ranked choice voting to other reforms that strengthen our democracy. We are also able to provide technical assistance and consultations with community-based groups and funders to incorporate language justice into your programmatic work. So we encourage you to start a conversation with us. Second, and more importantly, we urge you to think differently about how to engage limited English proficient communities. Simply translating one-page flyers is not sufficient. If we truly intend to center impacted communities in a process of dismantling systemic racism, we collectively need dedicated resources for language justice work. Encourage your grantees to include sufficient funds to cover costs of in-language focus groups, simultaneous translations at events, and multilingual organizing through social media. This work is difficult and not cheap, and it needs to be part of a culture change that is critical in achieving a truly just and equitable democracy. Thank you. And now I'll turn it back over to Heather.
So with that, we are actually going to move to question and answer, and I'll go ahead and moderate that. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them and ask a question, and I will check out in the chat to see what folks are saying. Okay. Why don't we just start with what are some of the learnings that really stood out to you? I know we obviously talked about a lot of the learnings, but is there any other learnings that you really want to just add right now? We can go to any of our speakers. Maria, Winnie, Sandra. Right. Let's start with Maria. Maria, you unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi. So a learning that we got particularly from the Spanish language focus groups was the way in which this community really thinks about democracy. There's a big emphasis on the we and not on the I, right? And this in terms of messaging, I think is also very important because a lot of times, particularly with ranked choice voting, the messaging that is created in English for English speakers then gets translated into Spanish, and that messaging is ranked choice voting is great because it's going to give you more voice and stronger voice and more choice as an individual, right? That message is not going to land so great with a Spanish-speaking community where the message might be more ranked choice voting is great because as a community, you can have your choices, right? You can have a favorite choice, but if in case that candidate can't win, you as a community have a backup. So that was an interesting finding for me.
Great. And Fernando is asking, can you talk a little bit about the best practices in terms of letting voters know what material is available in their language, or know that material is available in your language? Winnie, you want to take this one? Hi, Winnie. Sorry. It seems like we can't hear you. Let's see if we can get that solved real quick. You want to try again, Winnie? Nope. Let's see. Okay, let's come back to this. Go ahead and drop a message to our tech support and we can see if we can figure out what's going on there. So let's go to this next question, then we're going to come back to that. So let's see. We have one from Robert. Curious thought. How does technology affect experiences for non-English speakers? Are there technology literacy gaps to consider in different communities? Sandra, I think I remember something from our New York focus groups around different mediums that people use. I'm going to pass it over to you to take this question.
Okay, so the question it's about technology access, right? I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right question. There's a lot streaming through the chat. So okay, so curious thought, how does technology affect experiences for non-English speakers? Are there technology literacy gaps to consider different communities? Yes, so at Mingwan Center, we're based in Flushing, Queens, service primarily the low-income Korean, Asian American, and immigrant community here. And Flushing is one of the most diverse communities in the country. We're a majority immigrant population, large Asian American population. So for us, when we do our outreach, we always think about how we bridge different gaps. So that gaps can be anything related to generational differences. So generational differences, gender-based differences, I would say language-based differences. So we try to be as inclusive as possible as we do our outreach. You know, one thing we found as we try to do outreach during the pandemic, we've really relied on systems like Zoom to reach our community members, but we know that sometimes some of our older like older senior population, they not only have a technology gap, they also are just not proficient in using systems like this. So we try to offer hybrid methods. So for example, when we organized the focus groups, we not only offered the focus groups online, we also offered some of our participants to come into our office, and we help set up the technology for them to participate. So really, I mean, technology can really build a more inclusive community, but I think we really have to look for ways we engage with different community members and continue to like bridge differences and bridge the gap.
Great, thank you. I think we're still trying to get Winnie to be on, so I'm going to actually go. Oh, go ahead, Winnie. Are you? Yes, we can hear you. Hey! Okay, so I'll repeat the question. From Fernando, can you talk a bit about best practices in terms of letting voters know that material is available in their language?
Yeah, so in New York here, we often see that voters know to ask for language support, but in our outreach, we continue to emphasize that that when you arrive at the polls, that you may request for an interpreter, and that is built into every level of our outreach, whether it is a text message, whether it's a mailer, to emphasize that that language access piece is available to them. And I really want to highlight that we really like seeing when voters go to the polls, that they're taking some of our literature in with them, that in language literature. We also like often station our member organizations station themselves outside of poll sites on election day or near, to make sure we're here with the electioneering laws, but to make sure that they can walk in with that extra piece of literature. So I think it is a lot of putting in a lot of due diligence. So at every point, even if it's like literally seconds before they enter a poll site, that they can that they're being contacted by a community organizer or being shared immediate information. Fernanda, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and go to a question from Katie. I'm also curious about how the participatory research methods affected the participants. Did they give any feedback on their experience as a participant in this project? Maria, I know you have an excellent answer to this.
Well, I hope I do. I wanted to follow up really quickly on what Winnie was talking about, right? So, you know, what we have found over and over again is that the trusted messenger is the most important key to all of this work. If, let's say that, you know, Spanish-speaking communities in Las Cruces in New Mexico, if it's going to be posted on the, you know, English-speaking newspaper or on a little note on the library that there's materials available in Spanish, that's not really going to reach the community. What's so important is to have involvement of community organizations like Sandra's, like Winnie's, right? Like Comunidades Unidas in Salt Lake City, people who are already working with these communities, in some cases working with these communities for generations, right? So those are the people that are key, that are going to be sharing with constituencies, hey, we have information in our language, we can help you understand what's going on. For people to hear that from those trusted messengers is really the way to share this information. As to Katie's question, the participatory, we use participatory processes in all of this work, from creating, developing the study design to the analysis. Most of that participatory tools that we used was really within this team, right? The focus group participants, basically they participated in the focus groups. And that was the extent of their participation. This team helped develop the guides, make sure that things were culturally adequate for the different groups, that the language was adequate. And then as far as the qualitative analysis portion of it, I'll speak a little bit of what we did with the Spanish groups, which is we convened a group of 7 people who were involved in making the work happen, but we're not participants in the focus groups. We had the facilitators. We had Marcela, our Spanish language interpreter, who's interpreting today. We had a couple other people, and we read through all the transcripts. We digested the information, and then we came together to share what themes came up for us, what sort of information we were each getting from the transcripts, and then distill that to the essence of what's in the reports.
I'll also add to this that, when we were developing the focus group guide, we started developing in English, but, we had to develop it in language. I'm talking about the New York projects. And so we couldn't just stop at translating the focus group guide. We needed to make sure that, the words we were using, everything was localized and actually spoke to the community. So we actually, Sandra and Wendy recruited really excellent rock star facilitators who were people who are familiar with the community and familiar with our work, so that they could give us input on how we could make the facilitator guide really ask the right questions and ask the right questions that we were trying to ask. And so that was a really, really wonderful process. And we got a lot of, the facilitators also participated in the analysis as well, which I believe Maria said also happened in the Spanish language projects. All right, we have time for one last question. So I'm going to go to this question from Daniel. Access to information about elections for non-English speaking communities is definitely important. And this is work I've done in Flushing for the Korean American community as a part of the Korean American Civic Empowerment. But what about cultivating interest in actually voting? I'd like to ask our speakers ideas for addressing systemic issues of lacking interest in political participation in certain, but not all, non-English speaking communities, where as a result of lack of access to English or to in-language information, communities and individuals have felt perpetually disconnected from their local politics. So let's see, which one of us would like to start with this one?
Heather, I can start. I really like this question. Thank you, Daniel, for asking this. I completely understand that sentiment. Something we saw in our focus groups was that a lot of our focus group participants mentioned that they also felt a disconnect from local politics. But they had a lot to say about garbage pickup. That was one of the most salient things that came out across the board in all of our focus groups. Like, we have a lot to say about our garbage pickup, but they didn't really recognize the immediate connection between like their local communities and the role of local government. So I think the place to start here is actually taking a step back and often de-emphasizing the national politics, because sometimes that feels like so over the top, and really focusing on the day-to-day issues that our communities are being confronted with, and kind of drawing their interest in that way and really helping them understand why their vote will impact something as simple as an extra trash can, or what day the trash gets picked up, and really focusing on that level of conversation instead of going the high level talking about like national policies.
Great. Dulce, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, hi. There's I think also a wide misconception, I think, and not just for folks of different languages, but I think in general, that voting is generally limited to candidates. And so it's oftentimes a really good starting point when I'm with community to talk about not only the non-political politicized things as mentioned by Winnie, but also talking about initiatives, talking about taxes, and talking about projects or investments, school investments, and so things that are a little bit closer to their everyday life, like the quality of education their children are receiving. So talking about school levies is generally easier to talk about, to explain, and for people to be more willing to give an opinion on than a candidate. Generally, people have a lower level of trust in candidates and in politicians. And so I have found that the easiest way in is to talk about non-candidates, talk about anything that's not a candidate, and then that helps us then get to a point where we've established like a good foundation of dialogue, and then then it'll come up that there's this candidate or there was this council member or some elected official that has failed to do X, Y, or Z, and then we can kind of dive into that as well. But generally, I've found that folks are appreciative of learning about all the different things that come before them on a ballot. And I also think it's important for people to have the opportunity to, I guess this kind of goes to a previous question. I also think that people should press their elections departments and auditors departments to provide language in different information related to elections in different languages as part of the same piece of literature. So if your voter guide is in English, it should also be in all the different languages necessary for the community. And so the community doesn't have to rely on themselves creating or accumulating resources to provide information in other languages. And in Yakima, that happened due to the court order. So here, community doesn't have to rely on the volunteers doing that. It actually is required that the government does that. So I just wanted to put that on people's radar too, that actually is a much more like sustainable way that maintains continuity and doesn't put the responsibility on the same community members to educate themselves about information that government is privy to on a daily basis.
Thank you, Dulce. So there are so many good questions that I don't think, well, we're already at time, so we're not going to get to all of them. But I do want to offer that we can, try to address some of these in our follow-up. Just really great questions like, are there funders that we could recommend connecting with that actually want to do this kind of work? Previous to this session, we actually had a funder briefing with around 50 participants. So we're hopefully there are a lot of funders that are really interested in funding this kind of work. Other great questions that I'm seeing is what was the role of anti-Asian violence and how did that affect this work? Do we have recommendations of what kind of budget should be set for language translation and accessibility? I don't have an exact number for you, but I can say don't penny pinch because it's expensive, but it's so worth it. Because you're paying professionals, you're paying for platforms like this one that are make it possible to have conversations in multiple directions. So I'm going to pass it off to Maria. Like I said, we'll try to address those questions a little bit more deeply in our follow-up. But Maria, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, everybody, for your great questions, and thank you, Heather. I'm closing today with this great quote by Lani Guinier, who passed away recently, right? And she's a great champion of democracy. And the question I want to pose to everybody before we close is how are we, and by we I mean government, advocacy organizations, think tanks, philanthropy, candidates, how are we going to be engaging these different language communities in the democratic process? There's some great recommendations in the reports. There's small steps, medium steps, large steps. How are each one of us going to be doing this as we move forward? I will leave you with that question as we close this briefing. I want to thank you so much for your time today, for staying a couple minutes over. And I also want to thank our wonderful interpreters so much for being with us today. They're an integral part of our team. We really appreciate being able to share this with you. And like Heather mentioned, we will be following up with you with emails, copies of the reports, etc. Please reach out to any of us if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation. Democracy Rising, More Equitable Democracy, Ming Quan, and NYIC. We would all be more than happy to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to close this up. Thank you so much.
Happy New Year.